Well, welcome back to History of Fashion. We last ended with some great bathing suits from the early 1920s, some 1920s fancy dresses showing the lifestyle of a flapper. And I want to step back just a couple years to World War I and 1920. And I have some interesting pieces here because this was my father-in-law's father. And he fought in World War I. He was in Germany, originally France, then into Germany, and this uniform made it through. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, but I want to point out also this coat. This is from really about 1919, 1920, right in there. And this is actually a coat that was worn by my grandmother on her way to America through Ellis Island. So they have a little bit of history here. And there's so many similarities to today that I want to point out some of the detailing, things that we still see in fashion today, but from literally exactly 100 years ago. This coat, my grandmother was working class, maybe what we might call lower middle class, and came to America for great opportunity. And this was the jacket that she wore. They would have owned only one coat. And this was pretty impressive because one of her relatives was a tailor in Croatia and was able to create this. At that time, the country was known as Austria-Hungary, and so if you think about back into your history, there were great tailors from this part of kind of the beginning of Eastern Europe. But definitely no waistline. The biggest thing to see here, that there is no waist. We are beginning to go from being cinched up in our corset and all kinds of underpinnings to a very straight line, a very comfortable line, especially for women. The back, turn this around, again, very straight lines. But what's very interesting here is this almost arrow look because of the trim on here. This look in the back is very straight and gives you the illusion of a dropped waist, which we saw in all of the gowns previously. A lot of detail, very different from today in that people took time to do hand arrow stitching. This is called Soutache. It's attached by machine. In this time period, everything's made by machine. And the fun thing about the fur here is that modern times are not the ownership of our faux fabrics. This is actually rabbit, but it was dyed to look like chinchilla, which was kind of the upper class would be wearing chinchilla while everyone else in rabbit. But here it's been dyed to look just like chinchilla. This jacket being 100 years old, the fur is just starting to degrade. So a lot of people worry if they have grandma's fur coat and they don't put it in cold storage, is it going to last? And we see here that this has made it through 100 years, dragging it in and out of the classroom, and still well made today. These buttons I wanted to point out here were added later on. And about the 1940s, because back then grandmas wore the same thing whenever they hit with a few children, they continued to wear their clothing, sometimes for the rest of their life. There was, the Depression to go through. People didn't have money like today. And so things were kept and used again. But in the early 1940s, my aunt told me that she went in and she kind of changed some of the buttoning here. And these are actual Bakelite buttons. In fact, the buttons are probably worth more than anything in this costume. But they were buttons that she was able to purchase at a department store in San Francisco, and she added this. The original buttons that were on this were made of bone, so everything would have been natural. And now we have a synthetic, which is our Bakelite material here. One of the things that you did in those days, you had fashion on the ration because of lack of money. And this coat probably was relined the lining would wear out first, and it was relined probably 4 or 5 times. My mom told me this during my grandmother's lifetime here in America. So I love to show this piece because it is back in the time of immigration in the early 1900s. People came in the best that they owned, and maybe they were in the 3rd level, or what they used to call steerage, on a ship, like think Titanic, but they wore that one costume here, and that's what they started their new life in. I'm going to jump over here to this World War I costume, and you can see that the insignias here. Now my son would tell me exactly what they were, private to corporal, I'm not sure. But definitely, when you look at this, this is 100% wool. It is rather scratchy. It is a Melton wool construction, so that it's very heavy and can withstand the rigors of Army life. This would have been a dress uniform for soldiers at that time, but many soldiers were caught up in conflict wearing their dress uniform. A belt would have gone this wrapped around and cinched in the waist, opposite of the female with a no waist, would have been tightly cinched, and then a leather belt would have gone over this to hold in this and allow the soldier some range of motion, but keep the garment away from whatever conflict they would have to do. I want to contrast this, and I'll give you a back look here. Look at the beautiful seaming. These are flat fill seams. Fast forward to 5 years ago, because the Army has a new and different uniform now. This is my son's National Guard uniform, and you can see that totally different. Both made 100% in America, because the military requires that anything they use is made here in the United States, but totally different fabric. Wool with a polyester mix to give it wrinkle-free, easy care look. And there you go, the contrast. A lot less stitching, more like a man's suit rather than the tailored uniform of soldiers of 100 years ago. So that gives you kind of a big difference in still the same pocketry with the 4-pocket front. So with this, we're going to move to another decade.